Hey gamers, it's Chris here with Treant Monk's Temple, where knowledge is power. Today I want to do just a quick video where we're going to talk a little bit about damage and how I think about damage when I am trying to make a character be effective. So whether I'm making a character that's going to be using spells or melee weapons or ranged weapons, I'm always going to be thinking at least somewhat about how that character can do damage and how effective that damage will be. And when I'm thinking about theoretical optimization, I'm always thinking about how high I can get that number to be in any circumstance. And when I'm thinking about practical optimization, which is what I actually use when I make characters I'm going to play, then I'm thinking about what's going to get me the most damage reliably. So I want to start with just a quick mental exercise. So I want you to think about this for just a moment. This is a hypothetical. Let's say you're making a character, and this character is going to have an attack. And it can be a spell attack, it can be a weapon attack, it doesn't matter, but it will involve an attack roll. And you have two options for this attack. You can do either a 1d12 damage, or you can do a 1d6 plus 3 damage. And in either case, you have the same chance to hit. So I want you to think for a moment which one of those two you think would do more damage in combat. Okay, now, I imagine that we're going to have three schools of thought. So the first school of thought will be the most obvious one, and that is, it's a trick question, right? Because you got d12, which does 6.5 damage on average, and you have d6 plus 3, which does 6.5 damage on average. It's the same, so tomato, tomato doesn't matter. So our second school of thought will be a little more sophisticated, and we're getting a little bit more into the math here, and that is that the D12 is going to do more damage, and the reason the D12 will do more damage is because of criticals. So the percentage of time you do critical without advantage or disadvantage is 5%, but of course that can be manipulated by increasing your critical range from a 19 to 20, which could be done with the champion fighter and some other methods, or you can get it increased by getting advantage. So there's different ways to manipulate that. But say 5%. So with the D12, you're going to be doing an average damage of 13, right? 6.5 times 2. But with the D6 plus 3, you'll be doing an average damage of 10 because you're doing the 3.5 times 2 for 7 plus 3 is 10. So because the D12 does more damage on the critical, no matter how often the critical is, it means that the average damage for the D12 will be more than the D6 plus 3. Okay? And this is a very common school of thought. Then we work into the math where we determine the exact amount of time the critical happens, exactly how much more damage we do on that attack with the critical, and we add that in to determine our actual average damage for an attack. And although I don't disagree with the math, I do disagree with the thinking because I think it makes an assumption that we have no right to make. And in reality,
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong.
And that assumption that I think is false is that we are always going to do the amount of damage that we roll. And that's simply not the case. I mean, if we are fighting a dragon that has 200 hit points and we attack it and we hit 40 hit points of damage, yes, we inflict 40 hit points of damage. But once that dragon's down to, say, 10 hit points and you hit it for 40 hit points of damage, well, now you're actually inflicting 10 hit points of damage. No matter the fact that you rolled 40, it doesn't matter. You could have rolled 30, you could have rolled 20, you could have rolled 10. In all cases, you're doing 10 hit points of damage. So this is where the school of thought I follow comes into play, and that is that the D6 plus 3 will do more damage because it does its damage more reliably. Now let me give you a few examples. Okay, so let's say for a moment that we're fighting kobolds, and those kobolds have 5 hit points each. So if we hit it with the D12 for damage, we have 8 chances out of 12 of dropping that kobold to 0 hit points. So that means we have a 66.7% chance of killing the kobold. Now if we hit that same kobold with the D6 plus 3, we have a 5 in 6 chance of dropping that kobold, which is over an 80% chance of dropping the kobold, so significantly higher chance of success. And the average damage of the D12 will be closer to 4, and the average damage of the D6 plus 3 will be closer to 5. Okay. Now, I know we don't always fight kobolds, but no matter what we fight, in the vast majority of situations, we defeat that challenge with a final strike that takes that opponent down to 0. And whatever we did up and above what we needed to do is lost. This brings us to the final point I'm going to make, which I think is the most important point I'm going to make. And that's all about reliability. If I could have a ability that's going to do 20 points of damage every time, I'll take that every time over an ability that'll do anywhere from 15 to 30 points of damage, even though the average damage of that second attack will be higher. The reason is because of tactics. If we know what's going to happen, there is, I think, a fairly self-evident tactical advantage to being able to know, being able to count on certain points of damage. Something that does, say, 1 to 50 points of damage is not nearly as effective as something that does 25 points of damage, even though technically speaking the average is slightly higher. And of course, on a critical, much higher. So who's had this happen to them? You attack a creature, get a critical, your character does a lot of damage with your attack. Maybe you throw a smite on there because if you get a critical, there's a good reason to use a smite. And then you start rolling and you're adding up out loud. So so I start with 20 points of damage. And then, let's see, plus 8 is 28, plus 6 is 34. And then the DM says, okay, stop, it's dead. Who's had that happen? Everyone's had that happen. Everyone has had that happen. And then you have so many more dice left that you're like, no, let me finish, because you want to see how much damage it was going to be, because it's going to be so much damage, and you didn't need it. Technically speaking, that damage did you no good at all. These things aren't tactically advantageous. Sometimes they're fun, but they're not tactically advantageous. And if it's not tactically advantageous, then from a practical optimization point of view, it's inferior. So when I'm asked about things like, well, at low levels, what do you think of Primal Savagery versus Shillelagh? And why do you like Shillelagh over Primal Savagery? Well, because at 5th level and above, I'm not using my cantrips with a druid. And at the low levels, I'll take the D8 plus 3 or the D8 plus 4 over a D10 every time. Not just because the damage is a bit higher, but because that average is much more condensed. I'm going to do at least 4 points of damage or at least 5 points of damage, and I will take that every time over an ability that might give me 1 point of damage. I'm curious if people think that abilities that have a wide range of damage might have a tactical application. Give me some examples. I would love to hear them. Anyways, that's it for me for today. I'm not even going to sign off with my usual sign off. This is just a quick video to explain my point of view. I'll probably link to it a few times in the future. So thanks everyone. Talk to you next time.